Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm Ian, and I'm pumped for today's topic.
And I'm Jennifer. Always happy to join you, Ian. Today we're going to tackle something a little bit stressful, maybe. But hey, stick with us, and we'll make it not only understandable, but even, maybe a little fun.
Okay, I like the sound of that. Fun is always good. So what's on the docket today, Jennifer? What are we diving into?
Well, we're looking at this potential government shutdown happening in December. You remember that Project 2025 episode we did a while back?
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. Lots of folks feeling like they needed to stock up on canned goods after that.
Exactly. Well, think of this as part 2 of that, like a companion piece, focusing specifically on how small businesses can navigate this potential shutdown.
Okay, so batten down the hatches, get ready for the storm.
You got it. And to help us do that, we're turning to an article by Záda Beasley. She's a small business owner, just like many of you listening.
Perfect. Love hearing from folks who are in the trenches, so to speak.
Right. So Záda's the CEO of ZataData, a company with 50 employees. She's been there, done that, and her advice is super practical.
Awesome. Practical is what we need. So Jennifer, paint us a picture here.
All right.
Worst case scenario. What happens if this shutdown actually hits? What's the fallout?
Well, the article points out some pretty big impacts. Closed government facilities, for one, which means anything that needs access to those facilities is going to be stuck.
Right. So projects, inspections, permits, all that stuff could be put on hold?
Yep, exactly. And then there's the whole issue of delayed contracts and payments.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one, especially for small businesses who rely on those government contracts.
Right. If the government shuts down, the money stops flowing.
Ouch. Definitely not good for business.
Yeah.
And what about employees? How are they impacted?
Well, furloughs are a real possibility. Now, I know the difference between a furlough and a layoff can be confusing.
It's like pausing your Netflix versus canceling it, right?
Yeah, that's actually a good way to put it. A furlough is like hitting pause, hoping to restart when the shutdown's over. But layoffs, those are more permanent.
So potentially a big hit to people's livelihoods, not just some abstract political thing happening in Washington.
Exactly. And that's why we're here, right? To help you guys navigate this. Záda's article really stresses that taking action now can make all the difference.
Proactive. I like it.
Yeah.
So, Jennifer, what's step one? What should small business owners be doing right now as we get closer to this December 20th deadline?
The article is super clear on this. Talk to your contracting officer ASAP. Don't wait till the shutdown hits because then they might be unreachable.
Makes sense. Got to get ahead of the curve.
Right. You and your contracting officer need to be on the same page about what this means for your specific contract.
Okay, good point. But not all contracts are created equal, right?
Yeah.
How can a business owner figure out how vulnerable they are?
Well, contracts with multi-year funding or enough funds already allocated, those might be okay. But the ones that rely on that consistent government funding, especially those needing access to facilities or personnel, those could be in trouble, like cost-type contracts, for example.
Got it. So talk to your contracting officer, know your contract. What else?
Well, now let's talk about your workforce. It's time to dust off those employee handbooks and look at those policies, especially those related to furloughs, layoffs, and wage and hour regulations.
Right. No one wants to be figuring that stuff out in the middle of a shutdown.
Exactly. And I know, navigating the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA, that can be a real headache.
Yeah, you need a lawyer and a whole pot of coffee to get through that, right?
Pretty much. But Záda's article, it actually offers some really helpful insights on this. It talks about specific FLSA exemptions that could be relevant, especially for small businesses.
Okay, so we're not just talking about furloughs and layoffs in general. We're getting into the specifics of how to handle it legally.
Absolutely, and that's where things get interesting. We'll dive deeper into those FLSA nuances in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, listeners, get those notepads ready. We're about to go deep on the FLSA. But before we do, don't forget to check out Záda's full article, links in the show notes. Go give her some love on social media too, all that good stuff.
And, if you like what you're hearing, hit that subscribe button, leave a review, tell your friends. The more folks we can help prepare, the better.
Spread the knowledge. We'll be back in a flash with part 2. Stay tuned.
All right, so we're back and ready to untangle this whole FLSA thing. Remember we were talking about those exemptions?
Yeah, those exemptions. It's always a bit of a head scratcher, right? Who's exempt, who's not.
Exactly. And Záda's article does a great job of breaking it down. Basically, exempt employees are usually those in professional, administrative, or executive roles. They don't get overtime pay. Non-exempt employees, those are typically your hourly workers, and they do get overtime.
Okay, that's the basic difference. But how does this all play out during a shutdown? What's the catch?
Okay, so let's say you're a small business owner And you've had to furlough some of your workforce because of the shutdown, right?
Makes sense. Tough times call for tough measures.
Right. But now you need a couple of those exempt employees to come in for like a few hours here and there, just to take care of some essential stuff, answering urgent emails, keeping systems running, that sort of thing.
Okay, so they're exempt, so no overtime worries.
Well, not necessarily. Here's where it gets tricky. See, according to the FLSA, if those exempt employees end up doing any work that's outside their normal exempt duties...
Oh, I see where you're going with this. Like if they start doing tasks that are usually handled by non-exempt employees?
Exactly. Suddenly, they might be eligible for overtime pay, even if it's just for a couple of hours.
Yeah, that's definitely not an expense you want to be surprised with during a shutdown.
Definitely not. Zada really emphasizes this as a potential pitfall for businesses. You got to be careful about what tasks those furloughed exempt employees are doing.
So knowing who's exempt and who's not, that's only half the battle, right?
Right. You got to be clear about what everyone's doing during those limited work hours.
Good point. Crystal clear communication. So what else does Záda recommend for handling employees during a shutdown? Anything else we should keep in mind?
Yeah, she talks a lot about having a fair process for deciding who gets furloughed or laid off, if it comes to that.
Yeah, you can't just be playing favorites, right? It has to be a system.
Exactly. Záda stresses that the selection process has to be objective, non-discriminatory, based on clear criteria, like seniority, skill set, the essential functions of the job, and of course, it all needs to be documented.
Okay, so no picking names out of a hat. Fairness and transparency. Got it. What else, Jennifer?
Oh, and she also reminds us that communication is key throughout the entire process. Keep your employees in the loop. Let them know what's happening, what options you're considering, what the potential impacts could be.
Yeah, I imagine a shutdown creates a lot of anxiety for everyone.
Absolutely. Transparency is crucial. Now, while we're on the topic of employee management, Záda also points out another thing folks often forget about: subcontractors.
Ah, yeah, the subcontractors. Easy to overlook them when you're dealing with your own internal stuff.
Totally. But they're a key part of the ecosystem for many small businesses. And just like with your own employees, communication with subcontractors is crucial during a shutdown.
Okay, so what should we be discussing with them specifically?
Well, those stop work clauses in your agreements, those become super important.
Ah, right. Because if the contracting officer puts things on hold,
You got to make sure your subcontractors know to hit pause too.
otherwise you could end up on the hook for work that the government won't reimburse.
Exactly. So yeah, clear communication about those stop work orders is essential. And it's also a good idea to talk about how you'll handle things like payments and invoices during a shutdown.
Right. Cash flow is always king, but especially during a shutdown.
Exactly. Have those conversations up front, before the shutdown hits. It'll save a lot of headaches later on.
So we've talked about communicating with our contracting officer, our employees, our subcontractors. What else is on Záda's checklist?
One of the big things she talks about is mitigating costs during a shutdown. Remember, if you're hoping to get reimbursed later on, judges are going to want to see that you took steps to minimize your losses.
Makes sense. So what does that look like in practice? How do you actually mitigate costs?
Well, Záda suggests getting creative with those employee work plans. Maybe there are some other projects that can be shifted to, or maybe it's a good time to encourage them to use up some vacation time.
Right. A forced vacation, courtesy of the government shutdown. Not a bad deal, actually.
Right. Could be a good opportunity to recharge. And if vacation time isn't an option, maybe they can focus on some non-billable tasks, like internal projects or training.
Smart. Keep everyone engaged and productive, even if the revenue stream's on pause.
Exactly. And then there's the documentation. Záda cannot stress this enough. Document everything.
Everything. Every little thing.
Yep. Every cost, every communication, every decision related to the shutdown. Think of it like building a case,
Right. Got to have all your ducks in a row.
Exactly. And don't just shove those documents in a drawer somewhere. Organize them. Make them easy to find. You never know when you might need to pull up a specific email or invoice.
So just to recap, we've talked about the FLSA, managing employees, subcontractors, mitigating costs, and documentation.
Yep, that's a lot of ground we've covered. And remember, all this advice is coming straight from Záda Beasley's article. She's been through a shutdown before, so her experience is invaluable.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on to part 3, where we'll talk about how to not just survive, but thrive during a shutdown. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how to survive this potential shutdown. But what if, and hear me out here, what if we could actually use this time to our advantage?
Now you're talking. That's exactly the kind of thinking Záda encourages in her article. It's about shifting your perspective,
Yeah.
Seeing this shutdown not just as a roadblock, but maybe, just maybe, as a chance to do things differently, to come out stronger on the other side.
Okay, I like that. It's like that saying, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So what does that look like in the real world for a small business?
Well, think about it. Maybe you've been putting off streamlining some of your processes, or maybe there's a new market you've been wanting to explore. A shutdown, as inconvenient as it is, could be the push you need to step back, reassess, and say, okay, how can we make the most of this time?
It's like hitting the reset button. So where should small businesses start? What are some actionable steps they can take?
Záda suggests taking a good hard look at your operations. Are there any inefficiencies you can address? Any processes you can automate? Maybe you can renegotiate some contracts with suppliers or find ways to cut down on overhead.
So it's about tightening things up, getting lean and mean.
Yeah, exactly. And this could also be a great time to invest in your team. Professional development, training programs, online courses. Help them learn some new skills or polish up the ones they already have.
I like that. Turn a potential negative into a positive.
Right. And it's not just about individual skills either. This could be a chance to focus on team building. Strengthen communication, build a more resilient and cohesive workforce.
So we're talking about coming out of this shutdown, not just surviving, but thriving.
That's the goal. It's all about finding those silver linings, those opportunities for growth and innovation that might not have been there otherwise.
Love that positive outlook. But what about those practical things like security clearances and e-verify? Those can be pretty crucial for some businesses, and I know Záda mentions potential delays during a shutdown.
Oh, absolutely. That's where planning ahead comes in.
No.
If you know you're going to need those clearances or e-verify checks down the line, start the process as early as you can, factor in those potential delays, and have a backup plan ready.
So it's all about being proactive.
Proactive and prepared. And remember, Ian, shutdowns, as frustrating as they are, they're temporary.
Right. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. Focus on that light and use this time strategically to get ready for a smooth restart.
All right, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Záda's shutdown survival guide, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this, Jennifer?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. A government shutdown doesn't have to be a disaster. It can be a challenge, sure, but it can also be a catalyst for positive change. Embrace that potential, take those proactive steps, and use this time to come out stronger and more resilient.
Well said, Jennifer. Knowledge is power, folks. And remember, even in the face of uncertainty, there's always room for optimism, innovation, and that entrepreneurial spirit.
Absolutely. And don't forget, you're not alone in this. Reach out to other business owners, share resources, support each other.
Community over competition, especially in times like these. Now, before we sign off, a huge thanks to Záda Beasley for her amazing insights. Everyone be sure to check out her full article and social media links in our show notes.
And as always, if you found this deep dive helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this episode with your fellow entrepreneurs. Let's spread the knowledge and help everyone navigate this shutdown like pros.
You got it. Until next time, deep divers, stay curious, stay informed, and stay awesome.